"You're fired." Marco Bellini did not raise his voice. He never needed to. The words crossed the 40-foot conference room with the quiet finality of a gunshot. 30 executives sat motionless around the black marble table overlooking downtown Chicago. Rain streaked across the glass walls. The city below looked blurred and distant, as though even Chicago understood there were moments when it was safer not to watch. At the far end of the table stood Rachel Foster, 30 years old, 5'6", gray pencil skirt, ivory blouse, dark hair twisted into a loose knot that had started surrendering strands around her face 3 hours ago. Her laptop remained open before her. On the enormous screen behind Marco, $12 million waited for authorization. Or it had. Rachel had frozen the transfer 14 minutes earlier. Marco stood opposite her in a charcoal Italian suit, one hand resting against the table. Everything about him was controlled: the straight shoulders, the expressionless face, the black eyes that had made prosecutors reconsider indictments and competitors reconsider breathing too loudly in the same room. "Release the transfer," he had ordered. Rachel had looked at the documentation again. No. That single word had changed the temperature of the room. Now Marco's gaze rested on her. "You overstepped your authority. My authority includes preventing fraudulent transfers. You were told the transaction was legitimate by people requesting $12 million. Someone near the middle of the table had stopped breathing. Marco's jaw tightened. Rachel knew the warning signs after 2 years. The slight narrowing of his eyes, the nearly invisible flex in his hand. Most people fled emotionally long before Marco Bellini became visibly angry. Rachel had never learned how. "The beneficiary documentation was modified yesterday," she said. "The receiving institution changed. The authorization code doesn't match the original approval packet. I requested confirmation from Luxembourg and haven't received it." Marco stared at her. His cousin, Adrian Bellini, leaned back beside him. 38, elegant, immaculate, with the easy confidence of someone who had grown up knowing the Bellini name opened doors before he reached them. "Rachel," Adrian said gently, "we already verified everything." Rachel looked at him. "No, you verified it." A silence fell. Adrian's smile disappeared. Marco straightened. "That is enough. It should have been enough when someone altered the routing instructions. Rachel, if you send that money before independent verification, you may never see it again." Marco's voice became colder. "And if I tell you to release it?" She met his eyes. "I won't." Several executives looked down. The rain struck the windows harder. Marco had spent 20 years building a reputation based on one simple principle. His orders were obeyed. Politicians obeyed them. Judges occasionally obeyed them. Men with guns obeyed them. Rachel Foster, who carried a $9 lunch container and complained when his executives used corporate cars for personal airport pickups, apparently did not. "You're fired." Rachel stared at him for 3 seconds. There was pain in her eyes. He saw it. She refused to let anyone else see it. Then she slowly lowered the screen of her laptop. "All right." Marco expected anger. He expected pleading. He expected, at minimum, the stunned silence of someone realizing a 6-figure salary had disappeared. Rachel instead reached into her bag and removed a white envelope. She placed it on the marble. "That saves me an awkward conversation." Marco's expression changed. "Barely." Rachel pushed the envelope toward him. "I resigned yesterday." Then she picked up her laptop and walked out. Marco did not stop her. That decision would haunt him for exactly 31 minutes. Rachel made it to the elevator before her hands started shaking. She pressed the lobby button. The doors closed. Only then did she lean back against the mirrored wall and shut her eyes. 2 years. 2 years of protecting numbers belonging to people who could afford mistakes. 2 years of arguing with men whose watches cost more than her first apartment. 2 years of quietly preventing Bellini executives from overbilling subsidiaries, cousins from disguising vacations as business expenses, and vendors from adding mysterious consulting fees whenever they believed nobody would notice. She had noticed everything. That was the problem. 3 months ago, the discrepancies had begun. Small at first. $38,000 moved between maintenance accounts. Then $71,000. A duplicated invoice. A supplier that existed legally but had no physical office. A transfer authorized at 2:13 a.m., using credentials belonging to an executive who had been asleep on an airplane. Tests. Someone had been testing the system. Rachel had documented each anomaly. She had also begun receiving anonymous warnings. Stop digging. Your job is numbers. Remember whose family this is? She had never told Marco. Not because she didn't trust him. That would have been easier. She trusted him too much. And she had begun realizing that staying near Marco Bellini was becoming dangerous for reasons that had nothing to do with organized crime. The elevator reached the lobby. Rachel stepped into the cavernous marble atrium. Security guards watched her approach. They already knew. News moved quickly inside Bellini headquarters. One of them, an older man named Carl, looked genuinely upset. "Miss Foster, I'm fine." He glanced toward the elevators. "Do you need someone to walk you out?" Rachel almost smiled. "No." Then every monitor behind the security desk flickered. A red warning appeared. Carl turned. Rachel stopped. The guards became suddenly alert. Upstairs, something had happened. She forced herself to keep walking. She had resigned. It was no longer her problem. Outside, cold rain slapped against the pavement. Rachel opened her umbrella. Behind her, 30 floors above Chicago, Marco Bellini discovered why firing her had been the most expensive mistake he had almost made. The bank stopped the transfer permanently. Marco stood beside the conference table. His head of security, Luca DeSanto, had entered without knocking. That alone meant something was wrong. Why? The destination account doesn't belong to Valeria Infrastructure. Adrian frowned. That's impossible. Luca looked at him. It belongs to a shell corporation registered 72 hours ago. The room went completely silent. Marco's eyes shifted toward the blank space, where Rachel had been standing. How much? If Miss Foster hadn't frozen it. Luca paused. All 12 million would have disappeared. No one moved. Marco looked at Rachel's resignation envelope. He opened it. Inside was one page. Professional. Brief. Effective immediately. At the bottom, handwritten beneath her signature, were 7 words. I can no longer protect what refuses protection. Marco read the sentence twice, then looked toward Luca, her office. They were moving before Adrian could speak. Rachel's office was unusually small for someone controlling that much of the Bellini financial system. She had refused the larger one. Waste of usable space, she had said. Marco had found that irritating. Now he stood inside it and realized almost everything about Rachel Foster had irritated him because almost everything about her forced him to confront something he preferred not to examine. Her desk was clean. The personal photographs were gone. Her coffee mug was gone. The ridiculous little cactus beside her monitor was gone. She had intended to leave. Luca opened a locked drawer. Inside was a black folder. Rachel had labeled it Anomalies. Private. Marco opened it. The first page showed 17 transactions. The second showed 34. The third connected vendors. The fourth listed internal authorization credentials. The fifth contained names, executives, account managers, 2 Bellini cousins, a security supervisor. Then Marco reached the final page. At the top, Rachel had written, "Pattern suggests coordinated internal testing before major extraction event." Below that, highest probability. Perpetrator possesses family-level authorization access. Marco's expression hardened. She knew. Luca nodded. For months. Adrian entered behind them. "What is this?" Marco closed the folder. "You tell me." Adrian glanced at it. "I've never seen it." Marco studied his cousin. They had grown up together, buried their fathers within 3 years of each other, fought the Marzano family together, taken bullets in the same war. Trust in Marco's world was not given easily, but Adrian had possessed his since they were boys, which meant Rachel's warning was either paranoia or catastrophic. "Find her," Marco said. Luca hesitated. "She left the building 12 minutes ago." Marco took out his phone. Rachel did not answer. He called again. Nothing. A third time. Straight to voicemail. Something dark moved through him. Not anger. Something less familiar. Concern. Then Luca's phone vibrated. He answered. His face changed. "What?" Marco stepped closer. Luca lowered the phone. "Someone accessed Miss Foster's personnel file 7 minutes after she left." Marco's voice became very quiet. "Who?" We're tracing it. Her address is in that file. Yes. Marco was already walking. Rachel saw the black sedan 2 blocks from her apartment. She noticed because accountants noticed patterns. The vehicle had been behind her at the previous light. Then again, after the turn onto Halstead. She crossed the street. The sedan slowed. Her heartbeat changed. Rachel reached inside her purse for her phone. Marco had called 3 times. She stared at his name. Pride told her not to answer. Instinct told her pride was useless if someone put her in a trunk. She tapped call. Marco answered immediately. Where are you? No greeting. No apology. Rachel kept walking. You fired me. Where are you? Why? Rachel. Something in his voice stopped her. No anger. Fear. Marco Bellini sounded afraid. She looked behind her. The sedan had stopped. 3 blocks from my apartment. Do not go home. Her fingers tightened around the phone. Marco, listen to me carefully. Someone accessed your personnel file after you left. Rachel's blood went cold. The sedan doors opened. 2 men stepped out. Marco. What? They're here. The line erupted with movement. Run. Rachel ran. Her shoes struck wet pavement. She heard footsteps behind her. A car horn screamed as she crossed against traffic. Someone shouted, Rachel. She ducked into an alley. Wrong choice. A brick wall waited at the far end. She turned. 1 man entered behind her. Then another. Rachel backed away. Rainwater ran down her face. The first man reached inside his coat. Headlights exploded across the alley. A black SUV shot into the entrance so violently the first man jumped aside. The rear door opened before the vehicle stopped. Marco stepped out. No umbrella. No hesitation. Black suit in the rain. Gun in his hand. The transformation was terrifying. The executive from the conference room was gone. This was the man Chicago whispered about. Move away from her. The first attacker raised his weapon. Marco fired once. The gun flew from the man's hand as he collapsed with a cry. Luca and 3 Bellini guards flooded the alley. The second attacker ran. He made it 6 steps. Rachel pressed herself against the wall. Marco crossed the distance between them. His eyes swept over her face, her shoulders, her hands. Are you hurt? No. He touched her arm, then stopped. His fingers hovered as though he had suddenly remembered she no longer belonged anywhere near him. Rachel looked at the gun in his other hand, then at him. You came yourself? His eyes lifted to hers. Yes. Why? Marco looked almost offended by the question. Then Luca called his name. The moment broke. Marco removed his coat and placed it over Rachel's shoulders. I'm taking you somewhere safe. Rachel stiffened. I'm not going anywhere with you. Someone just tried to take you. And 30 minutes ago you fired me for doing my job. His jaw tightened. That was before I discovered you saved me $12 million. Rachel laughed once. There was no humor in it. So now I'm valuable? Marco went still. Rain ran along his face. No. His voice dropped. Now I know how valuable you already were. For the first time since she had met him. Rachel had no answer. Marco took her to his lakefront estate. Not headquarters. Not the hotel. His home. Rachel had worked for him 2 years and had never been invited there. The Bellini mansion stood behind iron gates on the northern edge of the city, illuminated against Lake Michigan as rain hammered the dark water beyond it. Security surrounded the property. Inside, marble floors reflected warm chandeliers. Rachel stood dripping in the entrance hall. Marco's coat remained around her shoulders. Guest room upstairs, he said. Luca will station guards outside. Rachel stared at him. I'm not staying. You are tonight. That sounded suspiciously like an order. It was. And you remember how well those work on me? For half a second, something almost like amusement passed through his eyes, then disappeared. This isn't about authority. What is it about? He looked at her. The answer seemed to disturb him. Keeping you alive. Silence stretched. Rachel removed his coat and handed it back. Our arrangement ended when you pointed at the door. Marco took the coat but did not look away. I was wrong. Rachel blinked. Marco Bellini did not apologize. Employees joked that the building would collapse before he admitted being mistaken. She folded her arms. That sounded painful. It was. Despite herself, she almost smiled. Marco saw it. Something changed in his expression. Softer. Dangerously softer. Then Luca entered, carrying Rachel's black folder. We found something. They moved into Marco's private study. Luca spread transaction records across the desk. Every suspicious payment Rachel had documented, connected through layers of shell companies. The money ultimately moved toward one financial network. Marco stared at the final account. His face changed. Rachel noticed immediately. You recognize it. He said nothing. Marco. He walked toward the window. Outside, waves crashed against the seawall. My father created a fund 32 years ago. Rachel waited. It pays medical bills for retired employees, families of men who died working for us, widows, children, people who were loyal before loyalty became profitable. Rachel's expression softened. How much? 280 million. She inhaled. Nobody outside the family knows. Very few. And the accounts being tested connect to it. Marco turned. Yes. Rachel understood. The 12 million wasn't the theft. No. It was the door. His eyes met hers. If the transfer had succeeded, whoever did this would have known our controls could be bypassed. And then they would have gone after the real money. Marco nodded. Rachel looked at her folder. The person responsible needed access to family authorization codes. Yes. So you have a short list. Marco's expression became cold again, a painfully short one. Rachel stayed. Not because Marco demanded it, because whoever had built the scheme had nearly stolen money from people who would never know it existed until the checks stopped arriving. That made it personal. For 3 days, Rachel and Marco worked inside the mansion. Forced proximity became its own kind of danger. She sat barefoot at the massive dining table surrounded by financial records while armed guards patrolled outside. Marco appeared at impossible hours. At 2 a.m, he placed coffee beside her without asking. At 4, he silently moved a lamp closer when he noticed her rubbing her eyes. At 6, Rachel woke with her cheek against a stack of bank statements and found Marco's suit jacket over her shoulders. She looked across the room. He stood by the windows on a phone call. When he finished, she held up the jacket. You keep putting these on me. You keep falling asleep in cold rooms. I fell asleep once. Twice. Rachel narrowed her eyes. Marco's mouth almost curved. Then she remembered something. Why did you never tell me about the family fund? Because legitimate accountants generally prefer not to ask why an organization maintains private accounts under 6 holding companies. I ask constantly. That is why I should have known better than to hide anything from you. The words landed differently than either expected. Rachel looked down. Marco watched her. For months he had noticed ridiculous details about her. The way she tucked loose hair behind her left ear when concentrating. The way she refused to drink coffee after 3 because it made her restless. The way she always thanked security guards by name. He had called those observations management. Now she was living in his house, and he could no longer lie to himself so easily. Rachel was becoming a weakness. Marco Bellini had spent his life eliminating weaknesses. He did not know what to do with one he wanted to keep. On the 4th night, Rachel found the connection. She walked into Marco's study holding a printed transaction log. He was speaking with Adrian. Rachel stopped. Adrian looked at her. Working late again? Apparently. Marco noticed her expression. What did you find? Rachel glanced toward Adrian. Something I'd rather discuss privately. Adrian smiled. Still suspicious of the family? Rachel met his eyes. I'm suspicious of everyone who gets defensive when I ask for evidence. Marco looked between them. Adrian, give us a minute. For the first time, irritation flashed across Adrian's face. Then he left. The door closed. Rachel placed the document on Marco's desk. Look at the timestamps. Marco did. They correspond with board meetings. Yes. Every test transaction occurred when most senior executives were physically together. He looked up. So the person creating them had an alibi. Exactly. Rachel moved closer, and each transaction used credentials belonging to someone attending those meetings. Marco's gaze hardened. Cloned access. Yes. Who had access to the conference systems? Rachel hesitated. Operations. Marco said nothing. Adrian was Chief Operations Officer. Rachel watched the understanding settle over him. You don't want it to be him. He's my cousin. That doesn't answer me. Marco stepped away. He buried my father with me. Rachel's voice softened. People can love you and still betray you. Marco looked at her sharply. She understood too late that she had struck somewhere private. My father used to say blood was the only thing a man could trust, Marco said. Rachel folded the paper. My father used to say numbers don't lie. Was he right? No. Marco frowned. People make numbers lie every day. She looked at him. That's why you have to understand the person behind them. Their eyes held. The room became strangely quiet. Marco moved closer. Not deliberately. Rachel did not move away. He lifted one hand. For one suspended second, she thought he might touch her face. Instead, his fingers stopped inches from her cheek. His expression hardened, as if he were angry with himself. Then the mansion alarm screamed. Glass shattered downstairs. Marco grabbed Rachel and pulled her against him as gunfire erupted from the first floor. Stay behind me. The study doors burst open. Luca entered. We have a breach. Marco's entire body changed. Who? 6 men. East entrance. Rachel looked toward the window. A black SUV burned beyond the gates. Marco pushed her toward Luca. Take her to the safe room. Rachel grabbed his wrist. You're coming. His eyes dropped to her hand. No. Marco. If they came here, they came because we're close. Gunfire cracked below. Marco removed Rachel's fingers from his wrist slowly. For a second, his thumb pressed against her palm. Go. Rachel hated the fear in her chest. Not fear for herself. For him. That realization terrified her more than the gunfire. The attack lasted 7 minutes. Rachel spent all 7 inside a reinforced basement room listening to violence through concrete walls. When the door finally opened, Marco entered. Blood covered the cuff of his white shirt. Rachel stood so quickly her chair fell. You're hurt. Not mine. She stopped. Marco looked at her face. Something fierce in his expression softened. You thought it was. Rachel looked away. He stepped closer. Rachel, you were gone 7 minutes. His voice became quiet. You counted? She hated that he noticed. Accountant. Marco almost smiled. Then Luca entered, carrying a phone recovered from one of the attackers. We traced their payment. Marco took it. Luca's expression was grim. Money came through a Marzano intermediary. The rival family. Rachel's stomach tightened. But Marco knew Luca too well, but the authorization originated inside our network. Rachel looked at Marco. Adrian. Luca nodded once. Marco's face became unreadable. Adrian disappeared before sunrise. So did $43 million from a Bellini reserve account. But the family fund remained untouched. Rachel had changed the authorization protocol 2 hours earlier. Marco found her in the security room surrounded by monitors. You knew he would run. I suspected. And you changed the codes without asking. Rachel looked at him. You planning to fire me again? A long silence. No. Something in his voice made her look up. Marco stood closer than she expected. Never again. The words carried more weight than employment. Rachel felt it. So did he. She broke eye contact first. Luca entered. We found Adrian. Marco turned. Where? St. Michael's. An abandoned church on the industrial edge of Chicago. Marco's expression became lethal. Prepare the cars. Rachel stood. I'm coming. No. He built his transfers around financial keys. You may need me. I said no. And we've established how effective that is. Marco stepped toward her. This is not a board meeting. I know. He may kill you. He already tried. That is precisely why you are staying here. Rachel stared at him. Then understanding arrived. This isn't strategy. Marco said nothing. You're afraid. His eyes darkened. Men had accused Marco Bellini of murder, extortion, corruption, cruelty. Nobody had called him afraid to his face in years. Rachel stepped closer. You're afraid of losing me. His voice dropped. Yes. One word. No defense. No denial. Rachel's breath caught. Marco looked almost furious that the truth existed. I can replace money, he said. Buildings, companies, men. His eyes held hers. Not you. The room seemed to disappear. Rachel whispered. Marco. He stepped back before either of them could cross the distance. Stay here. This time she did. She regretted it 19 minutes later. A message appeared on her phone. Unknown number. A photograph loaded. Marco kneeling inside the abandoned church. Adrian stood behind him with a gun. The caption contained 6 words. Bring the financial key, or he dies. Rachel stared at the image. Luca was gone with Marco. Security at the mansion had been reduced. Adrian knew exactly what he was doing. He didn't need Rachel's password. He needed the biometric key stored on the encrypted device in her possession. Rachel took it from the safe. Then did the most Rachel Foster thing imaginable. She created a duplicate. One opened the Bellini fund. The other triggered an irreversible freeze and transmitted every hidden transaction to federal financial investigators. Then she left through the service entrance. Street Michael's had been abandoned for 14 years. Rain leaked through the broken roof. Candles burned along the ruined altar, casting restless light across cracked saints. Rachel entered alone. Her heels echoed against stone. Marco stood near the altar with 2 armed men behind him. His hands were bound. There was blood at his temple. Adrian stepped from the shadows. You came. Marco's face changed when he saw her. Not relief. A rage. Rachel. She ignored him. Adrian smiled. Still terrible at following instructions. Apparently it's a personality defect. Give me the key. Rachel held up the device. Let him go. Adrian laughed. You're negotiating with the wrong family. No. Rachel looked at Marco. I'm negotiating with the disappointing member of it. Adrian's smile vanished. Marco almost looked proud. Do you know what he inherited? Adrian asked. All of it. The company, the loyalty, the respect. Men twice his age calling him sir because his father chose him. Marco's voice was cold. My father chose me because you stole from him. Adrian's face twisted. He humiliated me. So you decided to steal from widows? I decided to take what should have been mine. Rachel shook her head. You tested the system for months. Adrian looked at her. You were irritatingly competent. You sent the threats. Yes. The men outside my apartment. Yes. Marco pulled against the ropes. Adrian raised his weapon toward Rachel. Marco stopped instantly. That frightened her more than anything. Adrian noticed, then smiled. There it is. He looked between them. The famous Marco Bellini finally has something he can't afford to lose. Marco's eyes never left Rachel. Give him the device. Rachel stared at him. No. Rachel. If he gets access, hundreds of people lose everything. I don't care. Her expression broke slightly. Marco's voice became raw. I care about you. Adrian laughed. Rachel's eyes filled. Marco had not planned to confess anything inside a ruined church with a gun pointed at the woman he loved. But perhaps men like him were never given clean moments. Give him the key. Rachel looked at Adrian, then held out the device. Adrian approached. He took it, pressed his thumb to the interface. Rachel said quietly, Thank you. Adrian frowned. For what? For authenticating the transaction. The device flashed red. Every light inside the church suddenly died. Outside, engines roared. Black SUVs surrounded the building. Adrian spun toward the windows. What did you do? Rachel stepped backward. The key you just activated froze every Bellini account you touched. His face drained. And sent your transaction history to 3 independent servers. You. Adrian raised the gun. Marco moved. The ropes around his wrists dropped. He had cut them against the edge of the broken pew behind him. He crossed the distance before Adrian could fire. The first gunshot tore into the ceiling. The second came from Luca, as Bellini men stormed through the doors. Adrian fell. Silence followed. Then Marco turned. Rachel stood beside the altar. Shaking. Alive. He crossed the church toward her. She barely had time to breathe before his hands closed around her face. You came here. His voice shook with fury. Rachel stared at him. You were in trouble. I told you to stay home. You fired me. Technically, your instructions no longer apply. Marco laughed once. It was almost broken. Then he pulled her against him. Not elegantly, not cautiously. Like a man whose body had finally surrendered to a truth his mind could no longer control. Rachel pressed her face against his chest. His heart hammered beneath her cheek. Marco's hand cradled the back of her head. Around them, armed men quietly looked elsewhere. You could have died, he whispered. So could you. That is different. Why? Marco drew back. Rain fell through the broken roof between them. His hands remained against her face. Because I have spent my entire life knowing exactly what I could survive. His thumb brushed beneath her eye. And then you walked into it. Rachel swallowed. Marco looked at her as though nothing in the room existed except her. I don't know how to survive losing you. Then he kissed her. Not like a mafia boss claiming something. Like a man terrified that something precious might disappear if he loosened his grip. Rachel's hands closed against his jacket. For 2 years, every moment between them had been restrained. Every glance ignored. Every almost touch interrupted. Every unnecessary argument disguising a fascination neither acknowledged. It all broke open beneath the ruined ceiling of Street Michael's. When they finally separated, Rachel rested her forehead against his. You're still arrogant. I know. Controlling. Yes. You fired me. Marco's mouth brushed hers again. I have apologized for that. You said you were wrong. For me, that is an apology. She laughed against him. It was the first warm sound that Church had heard in years. 3 months later, Bellini headquarters looked almost exactly the same. Same glass walls. Same black marble conference room. Same executives. One important difference. Rachel Foster no longer sat along the side wall. She sat directly to Marco's right. Chief Financial Officer. Independent authority over every legitimate Bellini corporation. Her employment contract contained a clause she had personally written. No executive, including the chairman, may override the CFO regarding transactions under active fraud review. Marco had read it, then signed without argument. That disturbed the entire legal department. Adrian Bellini was awaiting trial for financial crimes while his alliance with the Marzano family collapsed beneath evidence Rachel's decoy device had collected. The stolen $43 million was recovered. The family assistance fund remained untouched. Rachel also made Marco send handwritten letters to every beneficiary, explaining that new protections had been implemented. He had complained. She had ignored him. That afternoon, a meeting ended at 7. Executives disappeared quickly. Rachel remained behind, reviewing quarterly numbers. Marco stood beside the windows. You're working late. So are you. I own the building. That does not make exhaustion tax deductible. He turned. 3 months had changed him in ways most people would never notice. He remained feared, still cold in negotiations, still dangerous enough that men lowered their voices when he entered restaurants. But Rachel noticed everything. The meals he now ate, instead of skipping. The security guards receiving mandatory vacations. The longtime employees whose pension plan had mysteriously increased. The fact that Marco had stopped pretending compassion weakened authority. He walked toward her. Come home. Rachel looked up. My home or yours? His expression remained perfectly serious. Oh, she blinked. Marco placed a key on the table. Not a hotel key. Not a safe house key. A house key. Rachel stared at it. You're asking me to move in? I am. That sounded more like an acquisition. Marco considered this. Would flowers improve the presentation? Marginally. I sent flowers once. You sent 86 roses. I was advised women like roses. The delivery blocked my apartment hallway. I dismissed the florist. Rachel stared at him. You fired the florist? He was inefficient. She began laughing. Marco watched her. That was still one of the rare sights capable of undoing him. Rachel picked up the key. Her expression softened. You know, living with me means I'll see your personal credit card statements. I feared that. I will question unnecessary purchases. I have security professionals trained to withstand interrogation. They expense $15 bottled water. I'll warn them. She stood. Marco reached for her hand, then paused, as he sometimes still did. 2 years of restraint had built habits. Rachel noticed. She slipped her fingers through his. The tension left his shoulders. They walked toward the elevator together. Before the doors opened, Marco stopped. There is one more thing. Rachel looked at him suspiciously. What did you buy? Nothing. That hesitation says otherwise. He reached inside his jacket. Rachel's eyes widened. Marco. He held a small velvet box. She stared at it. You cannot possibly. I am not proposing tonight. Rachel released a breath. Good. I have been informed there are procedures. Her mouth twitched. I'm proud of you. Marco opened the box. Inside was not a ring, It was a tiny silver calculator charm. Rachel stared at it. "For your bracelet," he said. She looked at him. Marco Bellini, one of the most feared men in Chicago, appeared almost uncomfortable. "The first thing you ever said to me," he continued, "was that my projected acquisition numbers were mathematically irresponsible. They were. You said anyone who approved them should have his calculator confiscated." Rachel smiled. "I remember." "So do I." His eyes held hers. "I remember almost everything you've ever said to me." The humor faded from her face. Marco closed the box. "You spent 2 years protecting an empire that wasn't yours." Rachel squeezed his hand. "And you spent most of those 2 years pretending you didn't need anyone." "I was wrong." This time, she recognized the apology. The elevator doors opened. Neither moved immediately. Beyond the glass walls, Chicago glittered beneath a clear night sky. The city that had once felt like Marco's kingdom now looked strangely different. Not smaller, less lonely. Rachel leaned closer. "Are you ever going to stop looking terrified when you admit you were wrong?" "No." "Good." "Why?" "Because I enjoy watching you suffer." Marco smiled. A real smile. Rare enough that most of Chicago would have refused to believe it existed. Then he pulled Rachel gently toward him. 3 months earlier, 30 people had watched him order her out of his empire. Tonight, the same empire waited below them while Marco Bellini stood holding the woman who had saved $12 million, exposed a traitor, protected hundreds of families, and forced a man who believed power meant needing nobody to discover the one truth he had never prepared himself to face. An empire could survive losing money. It could survive betrayal. It could survive war. Marco Bellini had survived all three. But as Rachel rose onto her toes and kissed him beneath the soft lights of the empty conference room, he finally understood why the thought of losing her had frightened him more than every enemy he had ever faced. Because Rachel had never merely protected his fortune. She had protected the parts of him he had forgotten were worth saving. And this time, when the elevator doors opened again, Marco did not order her to stay. He simply held out his hand. Rachel took it and went home with him.